So Nick, if you'd like to kick off, take it away.
Okay, I think a good place for us to start would be talking about the different elements of a bill. That's a good point for us to really get into this, I think. So at this point, perhaps if I share a bill on the screen, that may help us have a frame of reference, if that's okay.
Yes, thank you. Yes. Because obviously what's quite important is that all bills are completely different and no two are the same, but they will have some common elements, and it's understanding those different parts which are actually really quite critical. So this is, shall we say, a fairly typical electricity invoice. So Nick, what are the different parts of it then?
Right, so the different parts of it are the period that the bill covers. That's one of the key things. It's as you can see on here, and this is one of our own energy bills, and most suppliers will have something that's fairly similar. So you'll have your invoice period from and to, what your total charges are for the electricity consumed, fixed charges, any additional charges, and I'll elaborate on those as we go through our conversation across the course of this half hour. And then the climate change levy is on there also, which again I'll cover later on. And the total amount that you have to pay. You should have some sort of account summary on your bill as well that talks about where your balance is at, information around your contract, so how long that will run for, which is one of the often overlooked things in terms of saving money on with your electricity supply, is making sure that you're having a conversation around your contract end, and not getting yourself inadvertently rolling over onto an out of contract rate when that's terminated.
Okay, Nick, I think that's an important factor, because an awful lot of businesses won't necessarily be in control of their own contracts. A lot of this is outsourced to specialists and consultants and so on, who will engage with the energy companies to try and negotiate the best deal. And as you say, that a lot of deals are, say, a 3-year fixed rate, and there's an assumption that deal that you're on, rather like car insurance, is automatically going to be the best one going forwards.
Yeah, absolutely. A large number of consumers will have gone through the route of using an energy broker or some other third-party intermediary to negotiate that for them. So yeah, it's vital that you still check your bill when it comes through. Make sure that your TPI, as we call them, third-party intermediaries, are working on your behalf. If they've not contacted you about a renewal, perhaps reach out yourself to the TPI or to a supplier to have that conversation. The next bit that will be included on your bill that's quite useful is your MPAN. So as you can see on the screen that I'm showing now, there's the S followed by a series of boxes. That's your meter number in essence. So the first 2 digits of that meter number will tell you what type of meter you're on, which is an important distinction in the way that you're charged and the way that you interact with your energy supply and the payment of that. So anything that has a number of 01 to 04 is what's called a non-half-hourly meter, and that's very similar to your domestic home meter. Anything that's a 05 to a 08, and also historically double zeros, are half-hourly. And the difference there is that a half-hourly meter captures the energy usage, as it says, on a half-hourly basis, and we'll use that to calculate your bills. Non-half-hourly meters, the 01s to the 04s, very similar to the domestic. They use monthly meter reads, which can either be provided by you or estimated by your energy supplier.
Okay, well, thank you very much. I think that's an important factor to point out, or a couple of factors. One of them is the difference between the half-hourly and the standard metering, and then secondly, as you also point out there, that second part, which is also important, which is are you billed monthly or quarterly, and are they estimated or are they based on real readings? And we know there can be huge discrepancies in there, so that's a fairly easy one for everybody to point out. Same goes with your own domestic bill. If you rely purely on estimated costs, then you could be owed quite a lot of money at the end of the year.
Agreed. Other things to check on here, so you've got a section which is your electricity charges. That will talk about the rate that you're on. Important things to look out for are daytime, nighttime, evening and weekend rates, and to optimize those to put your operation in a period that's going to have the least impact on cost. And you've also got fixed charges on there, which again I'll cover as we move on to through the presentation. So really the key thing with your bill to check, just to sum up on that, is check the accuracy, make sure it covers the period that you expect it to, and keep an eye on when that expiry rate for your contract is coming around.
Okay, great. Thanks so much indeed. I think that's covered some of the basic elements of it. So should we go and talk in a little bit more detail about some of the other additional costs associated with the bill? I mean, some businesses, particularly those that use an awful lot of energy, will be subject to additional costs. For example, there's the climate change levy and things like that. So should we talk a bit about that now?
Sure, yeah. So as you mentioned, there are a number of different costs, both direct and indirect, that make up your energy bill. You've touched on the climate change levy. So suppliers will collect this amount on behalf of the Environment Agency, and it supports the various initiatives that have been brought in by the government to promote sustainability and to help fend off climate change.
Okay.
It is something that you can get exemption from by entering into a climate change agreement, where you would need to commit to reducing the impact that your business has on the environment. For more details about that, I would suggest looking at the HMRC website and find out what type of commitments you would be looking to sign up to. Because if you're unable to meet those commitments, unfortunately, you would then have to pay the avoided elements of the climate change levy.
Okay, thanks. I think it's fair to say that tends to be an issue that applies to the larger energy consumers, and obviously there are sectoral agreements and so forth as well. So check with your own industry if you're not sure as to whether there's anything in particular that you need to address for that as well. Okay, and then Nick, is it worth also talking about the day and night rates and making sure that you're operating effectively and efficiently within those different parameters?
Yeah, absolutely. So not unlike a domestic bill, you could have a cheaper day and night rate. You could even have a period that varies depending on the whether it's the weekend or an evening period. And those are the times where you should try and, if you've got that luxury, move your operations sort of heavy performance into, because you will often get a cheaper unit rate in the night because there's less demand on the network overall. There aren't as many people vying for that energy that's being provided into the grid, and so you can benefit from drawing down your energy at those cheaper periods. Check your bill; it should be on there. It should tell you what those unit rates are. If you're unsure of the time bandings, contact your supplier and they will be able to clarify when those time bandings start and finish.
Okay, thanks very much. And I also understand as well there are other issues in there like GEOS and so forth, and also energy bills are changing. Is that correct? And is this going to make life simpler for us, or more?
Will it make life simpler? Probably not, but it should make things fairer. It should make things fairer in the way that some of the larger costs are applied across all the users. I think it's useful at this point to talk about, as you mentioned, some of these acronyms that we love in the industry: GEOS, TNUOS, MOP. There are a number of other parties involved in getting the electricity from point of generation right up to your site for usage. One of those that we've mentioned, GEOS, stands for Distribution Use of System, and that covers the cost of getting the electricity across the network. You've then got MOP, which is the meter operator in your area, and you also have things like DCDA, which covers data collection and aggregation, and there'll be a partner that picks those things up. And of course, let's not forget, you can't avoid the tax man, so there's VAT to be factored in there as well with those costs that are associated with your bill.
Okay, great. Okay, thanks very much. So, what else do we need to know about our bills at this point?
I think if we, you talked about the fact that they're changing. There is a change that's coming. and this is known as the TCR. There you go, another acronym for us, and that stands for Targeted Charging Review. So part of your electricity bill includes the cost of transmitting that energy across the network and into your premise, as we mentioned. Traditionally, this has been worked out for looking at what they call the triad. It's the 3 highest consuming half-hourly periods in the wintertime, and there's a charge associated with the amount of electricity that you consume at your site in that period.
Okay.
If you're quite a clever customer and you've got the opportunity to switch your operation off and move things around to avoid these periods that are going to be assessed, you can do that. So that would mean, if you're quite canny and you've got somebody on site that knows when it's coming and can move things around, you can avoid that high charge. But the cost still has to be paid for people somewhere for that transmission. So where Ofgem are moving things to with TCR is that site capacity will be calculated and charged fairly across all users of the network. The last update for when that charge is coming in is April 22, 2022. It's just been moved. So that means it should start appearing in contracts now that cover that period. Your suppliers will be applying that element. In theory, you should see changes to your unit rate, as that's where the triad charges traditionally would appear, and there could be a reduction there. But then it's likely that the charge may move across into your standing charge. But keep your eyes open for it. Talk to your supplier again so that nothing comes as a surprise. And that date may move. It was, I think, National Grid spoke to Ofgem about maybe moving the date back to ensure that it was deployed in an effective way. So, as I said, just keep talking to your supplier and they'll give you an update.
Okay, and does this bear any relation at all to the maximum that you can draw down from your local supplier as well, with things like kVA limits and so forth?
I'm not sure that there will be a sort of direct correlation between that. I think kVA will still remain as an element of your contract. Just to expand on that for those that maybe need a bit of clarity, kVA differs from kilowatt hours. Typically in a domestic or a non-half-hourly meter, and your contracts will be talking about kilowatt hours, which is your estimated annual consumption, as an example. kVA is slightly different in that it factors in the power loss through transformers and wiring, and is an element that you agree in your contract for higher consuming sites. If you exceed that, there will be an excess charge, which again should be covered in your contract. So again, just keep an eye out for where your usage is at and avoid tipping over if you can.
Okay, so that's another element of the bill that a lot of businesses fall into that trap of accidentally paying for those excess costs, which can actually be quite significant.
Yeah, TCR could have a similar level and the costs per banding. So very similar to your council tax, for argument's sake, on your household property. You will have a banding that will dictate the amount of TCR that is charged. If you find that you are consuming over that amount, as estimated originally, that banding could move. So again, just keep an eye on what you're doing. As with all things, it makes sense if you can reduce it, because it keeps your cost down and it reduces the impact on the environment. Okay,
well, that seems eminently sensible to me. Okay, so is there anything else we need to know about managing our costs? I think that's covered a lot of the elements of the bill. Is there anything we've missed out from that, or shall we move on to talking about things like where you're actually using your energy?
I think just before we move on, it might be useful to talk about the breakdown of those costs, so people have an understanding of how that is. So if I can just share with you the Ofgem summary. This is an average across the energy bills that typically go out. So that there will be some variance around things like operating costs, etc., and profit margins that are within these based on supplier. But as you can see, there are a large number of elements there that make up your bill. It's not just turning on the power and the equipment and paying for the energy that drips through. that you've got the network cost, as we touched on with the DUOS. You have the environmental and social obligation costs as covered by CCL, and of course VAT. So there's quite a raft of things that are represented there.
Absolutely. So obviously, just looking at things like your unit cost, kilowatt hour and day and night rates, and other factors come into play, things like the standing charges and so on. So all in all, it can be quite complicated to fathom out which is the best contract from your point of view. So it's actually very helpful to know exactly what, shall we say, what the shape of your data use is, and maybe this is where we can expand a bit more on the differences between a standard bill and where half hourly data can really make a difference. Is it useful to talk about that at this point?
Yeah, we can talk about that. So in terms of the half hourly data, or the shape as it's sometimes referred to, typically that's a build-up of all of the energy that you've consumed across the day by half hourly blocks. That will often be used at point of contract negotiation so that the supplier can take a look at what your usage is going to be and come up with something that's bespoke and tailored to your particular consumption. It can be useful for you as an end user as well, as can some of the data that you can pull out through non-half hourly meters, through things like apps and data visualization. But specifically with half hourly data, you can really drill down into what your sort of base level of consumption is. You can check to see whether things are being left on overnight. You can see if there are variances between particular time periods. We ran a trial in our office and we could see exactly what time our first person came in by the fact that all of the lights went on. We could see exactly what time they started brewing a coffee because the kettle goes on, and we were then able to check, so we knew exactly where that usage was.
Okay.
We've run a couple of case studies as well with some of our end users, and anecdotally, one of the things that I heard about was a business where they had suspended ceilings installed, which is fine, and they noticed that their energy consumption was higher once the suspended ceilings had been installed than they expected it to be. And what they found was that the old strip lighting that had been in place on the original ceiling had been left on. Suspended ceiling had been installed, new lights installed there also turned on. So they were paying for two elements of lighting at that point.
Great stuff.
So they were able to drill down, find out exactly where that was, and then turn off the lights and reduce their energy bill.
Well, again, it's always useful to find out. If you're operating, say, Monday to Friday, standard 8 till 5 or whatever, and then you suddenly discover there's a whole lot of stuff going on the weekend, which you wouldn't normally know about, then it does beg questions. Whereabouts is this stuff being lost from? And we know that our industries are sadly really quite inefficient. And if we had a really efficient economy, we could probably turn off the equivalent of around half a dozen Hinkley Cs.
Yeah.
If we really got our act together. So actually addressing energy demand on an individual basis may actually seem quite trivial, but it's one of those things when it all mounts up, then it's actually really quite significant.
Yeah, a couple of years ago, Bayes ran a study, and the output from that was that between 30 and 40% of the energy that you pay for going into a business is lost. It doesn't actually go towards the running of your operation.
Right.
So that really promotes the importance of getting your data, looking at how you can do things smarter, and really reducing that impact on your bottom line.
Okay, and I think there's also a question from John, so thank you very much for this one, John, which is, do we get a sense that energy costs are likely to rise in the future as well? Because historically, they've always been a fairly low aspect of the overhead, and a lot of businesses have regarded energy as simply a fixed cost, rather like the rent and so forth. But it's actually one of those variables which may become more important as time goes by. So, Nick, do you think we're going to look at energy prices in the future?
I can see the market changing in terms of the demand for sustainable energy, particularly because a lot of the larger businesses out there, the sort of Amazons of the world, and people of that ilk have signed up to the RE100, so they have committed to being 100% sustainable, and to be part of the supply chain into that into those operations, you have to show the same sort of sustainability credentials. So I
Okay.
think what that will lead to is a request from consumers to have more green energy, or sustainable energy rather, and then you'll be having to make sure that you have got a contract where your energy is 100% renewable, and it may be that you're not able to grab some of that energy because obviously generation comes from a certain number of suppliers into the grid. So you may find that you're paying a premium, if you've not gone on board at this point.
Right. I mean, I think there's another corollary to that as well, which is also again a direct business concern, which is that increasingly the bigger companies, if you're a small guy in the supply chain in say automotive or aerospace, whatever, increasingly having some kind of environmental management system is a prerequisite to even tendering for business. Now, if you can actually demonstrate you're controlling your energy costs and therefore your carbon footprint, then you're well on the way to say ISO 14001 or 50001, the energy management. So again, you're displaying your commitment, and maybe this is something we can touch on a bit in the discussion over the next few minutes as well, about the general ethos behind actually getting for businesses to get to grips with this, which are not purely the direct financial costs, but there's a certain amount of, shall we say, collateral associated with being proactive in this particular area of business activity. So I'm conscious of time, and I'm aware we've got a few minutes left. So if people would like to post questions in the chat, then we'll be more than happy to review them. But I suppose, I mean, just on that last point, Nick, it's probably worth mentioning, and I think you kind of alluded to this about businesses being seen to be green these days is becoming really quite critical. The number of businesses have recognised there is a climate emergency and so on, and they have to be seen to be doing this. And we can say that energy management isn't simply one of those other variables of the running a business, but it's also important because the cost base of any business is by some margin is staff. So if you're offering a business which is seen to be proactive and environmentally responsible and so forth, then the chances are your business is better run because it's less leaky, shall we say, financially. It displays good management in every sense. And if you want to attract the brightest and the best, then it's a good advertisement for you. And increasingly younger folk, I'm led to believe, are actually using social media to look at company profiles to see who they'd like to go and work for. So think about that.
Yeah, absolutely. We found that there have been a number of studies that have looked at this. There was a McKinsey study, I think it was, and they found that 53% of new talent, so the people that are joining the workforce, now look at the sustainability and corporate social responsibility credentials of a business and take that as one of the factors of why would they join them. Consumers as well, a third of consumers would prefer to do business with a supplier who has sustainable credentials, and these are all backed up by facts. So yes, it's close to my heart because I'd love to get everybody out there on a renewable contract. And I saw a question come up about, can we help SMEs to adopt renewable energy? Of course we can. If somebody wants to pass their details on through this meeting, then I'm more than happy to have a conversation around that. But yeah, the world is moving towards these things. Extinction Rebellion, I know they copped a bit of bad press over the weekend about printing presses, etc. However, you can't ignore the movement. And last year there were people, not simply students, that were taking a day out. These were people in their 30s, 40s upwards. These were office managers who were interviewed by a number of media agencies, and they said they have to do something about this. So the world is realizing, that it is at a point where renewables and sustainable operations of businesses need to be considered.
Yeah, I think there's also a fair point as well from Richard, and thanks to Richard for this, which is, and this is a perennial one, is renewable energy more expensive than presumably non-renewable? I suppose is the bottom line. And then there's often seen a surcharge on the energy bill, which I guess relates to things like the climate change levy. And also there's shades of green from different suppliers. I suppose that can actually be a minefield, can't it?
It can be. You know, not all green supply is equal. Ours is 100% renewable. And again, there's some discussion around what is a renewable source. So in our case, we've chosen solar, wind and hydro. Again, not all things are equal. And there are different impacts of things like anaerobic and biomass, which are also options. So you may see a surcharge for green energy on your bill. That's typically from a supplier who has a mixture of supply in there, and will charge more for contracting that supply on your behalf versus their traditional sort of brown supply. It's worth looking at. Talk to your supplier, find out what that is, and shop around. Also engage with your TPI, your third-party intermediary, and specify to them if you're keen on making a difference through sustainability, that's the type of supplier that you want to look at.
I mean, there are specialist TPIs out there who will actually just focus on renewables and sun and green energy. So yes, it's always worth a discussion, and the price differential is certainly not an issue that it was at one time historically. So, and this is the way that things are going to move as well in the future. So do we have any other final questions, or do we have anything else that we'd like to pick up before we wrap up this session at all? Anything else?
You did mention costs and changes of cost of energy supply. The one other thing I'd like to mention is it's important to all businesses, particularly SMEs, is cash flow. Yes. So often you will find if you're a new business or your credit rating is something that has caused you to be pushed back in the past because you've not been able to register accounts as of yet on Companies House, you may find that you're on a less preferential business rate. So again, look at that. Look around for suppliers that can offer a product that supports that, maybe one that helps build your credit rating for you, and offers you alternative ways to pay. So it's all about shopping around, getting something that's right for you, understanding what you've got, and managing that.
Great, thanks very much indeed. And I think that's also important as well, because we are aware as well, a lot of the business that we go and see on a regular basis are, say, part of an industrial estate, and they may have no direct control over their energy. And there's a question, how do they go about lobbying the landlord, and can they get some kind of, so I wouldn't say class action necessarily, but can they actually mobilise other businesses on the estate and actually go and talk to the landlord, who may be a completely disinterested party in this and will also rely on a TPI simply to get the best deal. It's the equivalent of bulk buying. What can they do? So again, there are opportunities there to engage further up the food chain as well. So don't regard everything as simply a done deal. There are lots of things that you can actually influence for the good. And
absolutely.
And again, to pick up on what Nick has said about the number of businesses that have recognised this as no longer a fluffy thing that's nice to do, but is now actually much more of a central business imperative, and not doing something is no longer an option. So I think on that upbeat note, what we'll do is we'll say thank you very much to everybody for taking part in this. We do hope you found it useful. And what we'll also do is we'll say that over the course of the next 2 weeks, we'll move through the webinar series, and the next time out we're going to actually look at data visualization. And now that again, it gives us what bit more information about what actually is contained within our data, what's our half hourly data, how do we actually visualize this stuff, and also how does it enable us to manage our electricity consumption going forwards. How important is this for future reference. And then the third part of the series is going to be, and again, Nick, we've touched on this very briefly, which is, okay, I'm really interested in sustainable energy. What can I do about it? How can I engage with Bryt? I'd actually like to go and have it for my own premises, or my neighbours or whatever, on an industrial estate. How do we go about doing that? What are the costs? What are the benefits? And how does the whole thing work in practice? And obviously, the critical factor there is what are the financial incentives for doing so, and how is this going to pan out in the long term? So, okay, on that note, do we have any other final questions before we wrap this up? Well, and I'd like to thank everybody as well for taking part in this. I hope you've all found it useful. This webinar will be posted on various websites and circulated, so you can actually review it at your leisure, or indeed please forward it to colleagues or other people on your own industrial estate who may also at the moment be looking at their energy costs. Again, and just a final note to say that yes, energy is something that we can manage and we can do something positive about as well in the future. So thanks very much to you indeed, Nick, for your input into this.
Thank you very much.
We look forward to seeing you again next week.
Excellent. Thanks everybody. Thank you.
Bye now.
Bye-bye.